The locust will destroy Bajor. Bajor must not join the Federation. If it does, Bajor will be destroyed. Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Rapture, which is episode 10 of season 5 of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek as determined by my user polls. The episode to win my latest user poll for Deep Space Nine was actually a tie. It was a tie between this episode, Rapture, and the second season episode, The Maquis. I chose Rapture. I think the Maquis is a bit overrated. I could have made a video going over why I think it's overrated, but I just wanted more to review this episode because it's so, I love making fun of it. This is one of the episodes that really showcases Avery Brooks overacting. Anyway, before I go any further, Rapture is the episode where Captain Sisko is trying to investigate and find this lost city of Bajor, something that has stumped people for millions of years. However, he is struck by a holosuite accident and causes him to have all these visions from the prophets, and he's able to find the lost city. And further, Bajor is about to join the Federation, but Sisko has visions that if they do so, they will be destroyed. So he sabotages the process, which makes him very unpopular with Starfleet, and he wants to keep having these visions. However, Bashir makes it clear that doing so is putting his life in danger, and so when Benjamin is in a coma, Jake makes the decision as his closest family member to heal him, and thus stopping the visions, but yet saving his life. So, I'm pretty sure this is the first episode in Deep Space Nine where they really were continuing this or delving deep into this idea of Sisko being a god. Now, I talked about before how I feel like his whole emissary of the role as the emissary was kind of retconned. That it was just intended to be, in Bajoran mythology, just the dude who discovered the wormhole. But in later seasons, out of nowhere, all of a sudden they made it into like a important mythical figure within that mythology. And then as the season's gone on, the importance of that role became more and more important, where by the time we get to the end of the show, it's akin to Jesus, which definitely was not the original intention. But I think, Deep Space Nine does a lot of stuff like that. And Ira Steven Behr, the showrunner of Deep Space Nine, even had said in interviews that his goal was to make Sisko a god, and which is definitely, you can tell in later seasons. And this is a storyline I was never a fan of, to be honest. I actually could have done without it. I thought it was a bit ridiculous, and I do agree with Mr. Stephen Behr on a few other things which show up in this episode, which I'll get to later. As much as I love Deep Space Nine, it's one of my favorite shows of all time. I call it my favorite Star Trek show. I often disagree with some of Stephen Behr's choices, and definitely some of his stances, particularly as it relates to Star Trek. And I do wonder if Deep Space Nine would have been better off with a different showrunner. I mean, he obviously did some things right for me to love the show so much, but still, I don't know. Anyway, so this episode in particular is very obviously meant as a fantasy-esque, almost like religious-esque. Some guy gets, a vision from God and is able to see the future and prophesize, and he's becoming this like mythical figure, and it really steps on these stereotypes in a way that I think is actually quite cliche. The one thing that really hit me when I was like, oh, come on, when I was watching this episode is when Cisco starts playing with his food and like moves his food around to form the symbols that lead him to the Lost City. That's stolen right from Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Now, I know Star Trek episodes always do homage to classic films, and that's fine because they put their own spin on it, but that, to me, that was too unspun. That was too, like, just ripped straight from that movie, and it's just the way it was done, I thought it was too cheesy, and I was just like, that's at least he didn't use mashed potatoes, but still, it's like, I thought that was so stupid that really bothered me. And then you get other scenes of towards the end of the episode when Cisco's in full vision mode, where he like walks on the promenade and starts like praising, telling people, and he tells the admiral, oh, your son forgives you, and like going around like this prophet. To me, I felt very unearned in this episode, and very, again, like they were just copying other like stories, mythical movies, and shows that have done this before. And I wasn't a fan of that. But since we're on the topic of that scene, I have to talk about that scene because there was a moment where he's, prophesizing to all the random people around him, and he goes up to this random, like he says to one Bajoran, and he's like, oh, don't worry, the harvest will be much better this year. And he goes up to another random Bajoran officer and is like, you don't belong here. Go home. Now, this one always struck me because I remember watching this episode with my ex-wife back in the early 2000s, and she was like, what? She was like, did he just tell that guy to fuck off? And I it could be interpreted that way. It's like, what the hell are you doing here? Get the fuck out of here. But I know that's not how they intended it. They intended it to be more like like someone saying, oh, in order to follow your true path in life, this is not the right path from you. And so you're supposed to be like helping him. It was like, you should be out, you have better things to do than Starfleet is not the right path, or not Starfleet, but the Bajoran militia is not the right path for you. And it's funny because I remember reading some novels that came out a lot after this episode, where the novels that take place after the show Deep Space Nine finished, and they bring this character back and make him an important religious figure who looks back on this moment as the moment that he was touched by the emissary, and that the emissary saved his life by telling him that he didn't belong, like he didn't belong in the Bajoran militia, and really he should have been a Vedic. and he always brings up this moment as like a profound moment in his life. I think that's kind of cool that they actually took that one scene and ran with it, but I think that's this scene itself, as it stands within this episode, it doesn't make any sense, and it's just cheeseball to me, and I didn't really care for it. And I guess, since I'm on the topic of things I don't like, let me not bury the lead here too much of what really bothers me about this episode is I don't think their portrayal of Kai Wynn is consistent with how this character has been portrayed. I feel like the writers of this episode were unfamiliar with Kai Wynn, or maybe, I didn't look up who wrote it, maybe it was actually Iron Stephen Bear, I don't know, but even if they were familiar with Kai Wynn, they maybe just didn't care to be consistent with how she's been portrayed before, because to me, and it's funny because I've seen several people on YouTube express the exact opposite opinion, that they felt like this was a really good and true portrayal of Kai Wynn. But to me, I think anyone who thinks that misunderstands the character of Kai Wynn, as portrayed in pretty much every episode except for this one, especially her first appearances at the end of season 1, at the start of season 2. She's very clearly someone who is ambitious and power hungry and just uses religion as a tool to obtain her ambition, to obtain her power, that she doesn't actually care about the actual religion itself. It's just a tool that she can use to gain power, and she's actually quite vicious and immoral. And there are a lot of real life figures in current times and throughout history that fit that bill, that this character is modeled after. However, in this episode, they completely try to retcon that, or completely misunderstand her character, to make her actually care about religion, to actually be, and she gives this backstory about how she was, captured by the Cardassians because it was illegal to teach about the prophets, and that it was in a camp or whatever where she was constantly tortured. And that, so it portrays her more as like a true warrior of the faith. And I think this backstory is completely inconsistent with how this character has been portrayed. In fact, if I were to come up with an appropriate backstory for Kai Wynn, as she's portrayed in pretty much every episode except for this one, it would be something that she lived in privilege. And during the occupation, it was like I would say like maybe the daughter of a collaborator, and lived in luxury and experienced none of the trauma, but hid this fact and tried to act like and pretend like I'm one of you and I know what you're going on. But really, she had no connection to that, and she's just, once she had power during the occupation, when the occupation ended, she lost that power, so she used religion as a tool, an excuse to regain that power, to regain that luxury, because that's what she was used to. I think that's a more appropriate backstory. But it's not just that. Like, the whole episode, like, here she admits to Kira that she was wrong about Sisko, and when she sees that Sisko discovered the city of Valhalla, she realizes that she was a bit misguided in who her friends or who her enemies was, and she starts to change her mind about the Federation because of that. And again, that is completely inconsistent with how her character has been portrayed. She actually, when Sisko discovered Valhalla, she should have not given a shit and spun it and used some excuse to try to spin it to make it appear that Sisko is the villain. And that's why I actually prefer the episode The Reckoning to this episode, the 6th season episode, that is kind of the sequel to this, kind of the follow-up, because it continues the storyline with the prophets. And I know apparently the episode The Reckoning is hated by us, by a chunk of the fan base as being too cheesy and over the top. I never got that. I actually really liked that episode, but I'll cover that at another time. But as it's relevant here, the reason why I prefer that episode is because the portrayal of Kai Wynn is consistent, because there she's very antagonistic to Sisko, even though Sisko is doing the will of the prophets and the prophets are speaking through him. She still uses any bullshit excuse or spinning it to make him the enemy, to make him the villain of the story, when it's clear that he's actually, touched by the prophets. That is how she should have been portrayed in this episode. That is way more consistent with her character, that she doesn't give a fuck about the prophet or what's actually right or wrong. She's just delusional, and she's just so power hungry that she'll spin any occurrence that happens to fit her narrative of what's going to give her the biggest power, fulfill her ambition and give her the most power, which is really true for a lot of politicians, not just throughout history, but also in current times, and of course you could say, oh, Wynn's not a politician, but religious leaders with this much power, yes, they also fit the bill. So, in current times as well. And so, so this is what really bothered me about this episode. And it's funny because the same people who praise her portrayal in this episode were also criticized her portrayal in the final arc that ends the show at the end of season 7, where she joins up with the Pile Race and joins up with Dukat to unleash the Pile Race. But I actually loved that portrayal of her. That actually was very consistent. In fact, I thought it was amazingly well done, because it showed the moment where she was having a crisis of faith and the moment where she realized she needed to back the Pile Races, when Kira humbly suggested that she give up her power. And she's like, give up my power? And that is what this character's all about. She doesn't give a fuck about religion or prophets or helping people. She's all about power. And so this is why I think this episode was very poorly written, and she's completely out of character in this episode. That is definitely my biggest gripe. Now, let's talk about some overacting. When I did a top 10 best actors in Star Trek, I got a ridiculous amount of comments criticizing me for not including Avery Brooks. Now, everyone has their different opinions, and I kind of made that list on a whim. And what a lot of people missed was, when I made that list, I was more of judging these actors and their appearances and other things, rather than... In fact, I was kind of neglecting Star Trek, but using these Star Trek actors as like how well were their performances and other things, and which is why a lot of people were like, "Why didn't you have Mark Alema on this list?" It's like, because Mark Alema hasn't really been in anything else other than Star Trek, and I have seen him in a lot of B movies and stuff, which were not good. But one of these days I should make another one that was just about their performance in Star Trek. It would be made more true. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. Point is, tons of people were saying that criticizing me for not including Avery Brooks. And here's the thing: if you thought Avery Brooks deserved to be on the list of the top 10 best actors of Star Trek, then you have a very different idea of what good acting is than I do. And I would argue probably a very different idea. I would say you have no concept of the difference between theatrical acting and film acting. Now, for television, that would also be film acting. This is something that I was trained on throughout my studies, and when I went to film school and other things. They made it very clear the difference between film acting and theater acting, because theater, you're performing on the stage where people are sitting very far away, so you have to be grand and big, whereas film and television, the camera's right up in your fucking face, so you got to be subtle and pull it back. So, by those standards, Avery Brooks is a horrible actor. I'm sorry. But, yeah, of course, I find his overacting quite amusing, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to review this episode. I like laughing at it, but this humor, of course, is not intentional. The moments where he goes completely over the top. Oh, I'm gonna look at I don't know, that scene is hilarious to me, and it's not meant to be funny. But there are some times where I take, like, his overacting in the Mirror Universe, for example. I think that's hilarious too, but not so much in a bad way, more of because it kind of fits the story, so it works a bit better. And other moments where he plays a crazy person, like when that telepathic thing took over him in season 1. He was like, clock, and he makes this clock like that kind of weird over the top acting works for the episode, where here it's just cheeseball. It's just cheesy. It's just so dumb. I just don't understand people who would think. And I also think of the episode In the Pale Moonlight, which is one of my favorite episodes of all time. And I read this review saying this episode is amazing despite Avery Brooks' attempt to torpedo it with his overacting, and I completely agree with that. And I've gotten shit from people before, but I don't give a fuck. Like, I stand by this. And you know, again, acting is what good acting is clearly a subjective thing, as some people clearly prefer this over the top acting, but just my training is telling me that this is bad acting. Anyway, not that I'm some genius actor, professional, I'm a horrible actor, I'm just an amateur at best, but still, I've studied this, and this is, this is not good acting. Everything that I know is telling me this is not good acting, but hey, if you want to think it's good acting, who am I? Again, I'm not a professional, who am I to judge? But I'm just telling you, this is bad acting. Anyway, let me get, speaking of Cisco's whole telling Starfleet not to join, Bajor not to join the Federation, this is what I do like about this episode, because I actually appreciate that this is actually nice foreshadowing, because usually Deep Space Nine doesn't do a lot of foreshadowing. As I said, they usually make shit up as they go. And I definitely got that impression in the episodes, that two-parter where Worf and Garrick go to the Dominion and they get trapped in the prison cell, and then Dukat joins the Dominion. Like, I don't actually like that two-parter all that much. I've seen a lot of people love it, but to me that was the writers were, oh fuck, we shouldn't have made the Klingons the villain, let's put the focus back on the Dominion and Cardassian. But this episode foreshadows that, so they clearly came up with with that thought beforehand. And I don't know if they didn't tell what's his face, Alexander Siddig, but I don't know if they were aware also that the Dr. Bashir who appears in this episode apparently is not Dr. Bashir, it's a changeling. Because if you go by that two-parter I mentioned, by Inferno's Light or whatever, when they find the real Dr. Bashir, he's wearing the old uniform, which they just had that uniform changed like several months before. And in this episode, Bashir is wearing the new uniform. So if Bashir was abducted by the Dominion before they introduced the new uniforms, then that means this is the changeling. That's interesting to think about, but I don't know if they thought about it. But anyway, that's not the foreshadowing I was talking about. I was talking about how he's saying there's locusts. He has a vision of locusts, and the locusts like leave Bajor immediately, and everyone's like, well, that's a good thing, right? And he's like, oh, I don't know, it doesn't feel like a good thing. And then he says, oh, the locusts go to Cardassia. And then he comes back eventually and says, there are locusts. If Bajor joins the Federation, then the locusts will destroy Bajor. Now, at the time, you don't really know what the hell he's talking about, but if you go back and watch this after watching Season 5, in retrospect, it's clear the locusts are the Dominion, because this is foreshadowing that the Dominion joined with Cardassia, and the Dominion fleet left Bajor immediately, went straight to Cardassia, but then they came back. And if you recall the end of Season 5, Bajor is able to survive the fighting with the Dominion Federation because they were not a member of the Federation. They made a non-aggression pact with the Dominion, because the Dominion took over Deep Space Nine and Bajor, and had Bajor been part of the Federation, Dominion would have attacked it and conquered it. But because they weren't part of the Federation, they were able to survive and keep out of the fighting. So that's so Cisco was actually right here by telling Bajor not to join the Federation. He actually did save Bajor with his visions, even though he didn't understand what they meant, but that's what they were foreshadowing. And I do like that. I think that's a rare example of really strong foreshadowing in Deep Space Nine. And that I do appreciate. That I think is good. Now, I think listening to them talk about some of the details about what Bajor joining the Federation would mean makes me think that they don't really understand what the Federation is, or the writers of this episode, because they said, oh, the Bajoran militia has to be absorbed into Starfleet. I mean, but does it? Because other member species like the Vulcans and the Andorians, even in present time, has been shown to have their own military force, their own internal force. So it seems like that's not true. Now, maybe some Bajoran militia members would become Starfleet members, or make it easier for them to transition should they choose, but it seems like Bajor would retain an internal home force. It kind of reminds me of that episode, the Paradise Lost episode, where they had the Federation president acting as the being in charge of the defense of Earth, which actually doesn't make any sense, because the Federation president should be in charge of the Federation. There should be a governor of Earth who is in charge of specifically Earth's defense. So sometimes I think they get the political structure wrong. And also they have the Starfleet Admiral here being, presiding over the ceremony. Shouldn't they have a Federation official? Shouldn't there be like a member of the Federation Council and not a Starfleet officer? I don't know. I guess those are all nitpicks. But let me get into the bigger issue I had. Let me get back to what I hinted at before about Ira Stephen Bear and how I disagree with some of the things he did. Now, let me bring up there was a documentary, What We Left Behind, where they created this mythical season 8, and they had all the writers meet in the writers' room to come up with this, just sort of fun exercise. And one of the things Ira Stephen Bear said to the writers started, he's like, I feel so great, and let me congratulate everyone for not having Bajor join the Federation. It was so great we're able to avoid that. What? Like that? And then when you watch the actual season 8 that they create, the Federation are like portrayed as like these evil band of atheists who are anti-religion and refuse to let Bajoran have religion. They want them to assimilate in the Federation so they can consume and destroy their culture. And that makes me think that Ira Stephen Bear has no fucking understanding of Star Trek or the Federation at all. Now, he has successfully explored the darker side of Federation through stuff like the Maquis and Section 31 and In the Pale Moonlight, which is stuff I can agree, because even Paradise had to have some cost. But it kind of skirts the line, and this saying that this betrayal in this mythical season 8 is crossing the line. To make me feel like he has no understanding of the vision. You could call it Gene Roddenberry's vision, but the vision of Star Trek and what it stands for and what the Federation stands for. It's funny because people criticize like newer Trek shows for not understanding this, and I'm one of them, because there's that Picard season 1, I think, completely misunderstood it. But a lot of other people just criticize, newer Trek sucks, doesn't understand it. But it's kind of clear that Ira Stephen Bear doesn't understand it either. But to be fair, like as I said, he never crossed the line in Deep Space Nine. But in that mythical season 8 proves that if he was probably being held back by higher ups from crossing that line, and he wanted to cross the line because he doesn't fucking understand. And so I do get the impression after watching that the part of the reason like Bajor didn't join the Federation in this episode was because, he didn't want them to, because he doesn't fucking understand what the Federation are. And I just, that line of, just so great we got Bajor not to join the Federation, like that makes no sense, and that pisses me off. And I really do think that Deep Space Nine should have ended with Bajor joining the Federation, because that was the stated goal in the pilot episode. And it seems like that is a plot point that they neglected, but now, of course, watching this, I know why, because Ira Stephen Bear was the showrunner, and he purposely neglected it, because he doesn't understand what the Federation fucking stands for. And because it's not an erasure of identity. Like, Vulcan culture still exists, and Dorian culture still exists. They're still autonomous. They're just joined in the spirit of cooperation and stuff. It's just, yeah, it just pisses me off that it's just, I could not understand how much that thing pissed me off. It kind of makes me feel like, yeah, he shouldn't have been the showrunner of Deep Space Nine. Despite how much I love it, it feels like it could have been even better in the hands of someone else. Anyway, there was a novel, again, getting back to these novels that came out after Deep Space Nine finished, that takes place after Deep Space Nine finished, where Bajor joined the Federation. I actually really love that novel. I think it's really good, and I think it's fitting, and I would like to think of it as canon. Definitely way better than that bullshit mythical season 8 that they came up with. God, that was so dumb. Bashir is the leader of Section 31. Get the fuck out of here. Anyway, so, what else about this episode? Oh, so Cassidy Yates returns after her getting arrested for helping the Maquis back in the episode 4, The Calls in Season 4. And I don't know, like, I feel like they're implying, particularly with this episode, because later Cassidy Yates and Cisco do get really close, but I feel like, and I remember watching this when it first came out, at this stage in the show, that they weren't really all that close, and this episode is implying a closeness that to me felt unearned and out of nowhere. And it's also like when Jake first brings up to Benjamin, it's like, oh, Cassidy Yates is coming back. Benjamin doesn't seem to give a fuck. And he's like, oh, whatever. Oh, we'll see. It seems like he's like trepidatious and is still kind of hasn't forgiven her for helping the Maquis. But when she comes back, he like kisses her and hugs her, and it's like, I kept your quarters safe for you, everything is how you want it. And it's like, but so why was he being so shitty with Jake? Like, that doesn't make any sense. I don't get it. Like, you could argue he was being distracted by playing with his food and making that stupid bullshit that led them to the city, but still, to me, he came off as more than just distracted. He came off as indifferent and not really sure how he feels about Cassidy Yates. And then again, as I said, Yates was heavily involved in the whole deal with Benjamin's life. And listen to your son. Yeah, she's a bit of an overactor here. Well, she did get better in later stuff. I've seen her like in 24. She was really good. And of course, that Star Trek ripoff show, she was pretty good in that too. Anyway, yeah, I didn't really care for that. So, my rating for Rapture. Sorry. My rating for Rapture out of 10 is a 5 average. As I said, the Kai Wynn stuff really brings this episode down for me. Some of the religious figurehead having the vision stuff felt very cliche and unoriginal, like they were just copying from other material. But I did like the stuff with some of the character interactions with Jadzia, and I like the foreshadowing of the Dominion joining the Cardassians. That's definitely my favorite part of the episode. And other things about this episode I felt were enjoyable as a regular episode. So it's okay. It's not a terrible episode, but definitely not a good one. So that is it for my review of Rapture. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to check out my channel as I cover many more Star Trek videos, including Star Trek Strange New Worlds, as well as other shows such as The Expanse, Star Wars Rebels, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.